Buongiorno, good morning. It's early and we have got a lot of work to do today. I went through my garden last night and this is the third time that I have covered my table with tomatoes to process along with a whole nother bucket. Let me show you what I've got. As you can see, we've got Romas, San Marzanos, and a whole nother container down here. Yes, I have a mess out here. But there you go. Now, let me show you some more stuff that we've got to get done because where you see this many, I also went through and got some of my zinnias that were drying out. I've got them going to dry so I can get the seeds done. But my garden right now, especially all my tomato plants, are full again. Like I could come through and probably pick a whole nother bucket. So today we're going to be working with our tomatoes and processing all of them in a few different ways. We're going to make some powdered tomatoes so we can have tomato powder to make tomato paste. I find that when I take my tomatoes and dehydrate them and turn them into powders, it's easier to make a little bit of tomato paste at a time. I don't know if you're like we are. We don't ever use a whole little can. So what happens is we get what we need out of the can, we put it in a safe container, stick it in the fridge. It eventually gets pushed to the back of the fridge, and months later or weeks later or whatever it is, when I rediscover it, we have grown some great penicillin in it. So it gets tossed out. So I have learned that with tomato powder, you can add add a little bit of water, stir it up to the consistency you want and the amount you want, and use it. And you've always got tomato paste on hand. You can also thin it out a little more and make sauce, tomato sauce with it. Tastes amazing. So we're going to be doing some dehydrating of my tomatoes. We're going to create some basic tomato sauce because we use a lot of tomato sauce during the year, whether it's to throw into marinara sauce, a spaghetti sauce, a bolognese, whatever that looks like, or it's to make chili, or it's to make anything that uses your basic tomato sauce. So I don't season the tomato sauce except with salt. And the reason I do that is to bring out the flavors while it's being canned. I wait until I open it, and whatever I'm using, that's when I add my seasoning. And then we are going to make some great, what my kids love is known as homemade spaghetti sauce. Um, I'm going to write the recipe down this time. I usually do a pinch of this, a dash of that, a little bit of this, because that was the way I grew up learning how to cook. My mother never measured anything. I don't know about your moms and if they did, but my mom didn't. And so it's taken me a lot to learn how to write down exact measurements. So anyway, we're going to be doing all of this and we're going to have fun doing it today. It's at least going to be 99 degrees here with a real feel of probably about 106, 110. Humidity is up. I live in southeastern North Carolina along the coast. So needless to say, it's going to be a hot one. Let's get in the kitchen and let's get cooking. We're in the kitchen and we're going to start with our basic tomato sauce. Now, earlier in the week, I had to clear out my table, so I went ahead and processed all the tomatoes that I had on my table outside that were continuing to ripe. So I had large red cherry tomatoes, I have Romas, and I have San Marzanos. And so I took my cherry tomatoes and I put them in the oven. I cut them in half, laid them on parchment paper in a cookie sheet, 425 for about 5-ish minutes. Easy peasy, throw them in my food mill, grind them around, separated the seed from their little bit of pulp, and got them going. My Romas and my San Marzanos, I cored, blanched, put them in ice water, and then waited for them to cool, pulled the skins off, ran them through my food mill again. We're going to take all of these, we're going to add them to my stock pot, and we're just going to start cooking it down because even though I've done all that, it's still a little runny. I like my tomato sauce to be just a little bit thicker, and so we're going to reduce it by about a third. That means we're going to put them in the pot, bring it to a boil, keep stirring it, keep watching it, and then we're going to let it just sit there and simmer till some of that water evaporates. So let's get going. Now, I use my tomatoes. I don't separate my tomatoes out, especially when making sauce and stuff. I like the in-depth flavor that I get from my cherry tomatoes, my Romas, my San Marzano's. I like having it all mixed up together. It just makes a really good tasting sauce. And of course, because they're homegrown, there's the pride of using something that you produced and watched, well, technically planted and watched grow. From seed to starch to transplanting and then babying them. Because let's face it, when we have a garden, it's a lot of work. And when you have a large garden, like I consider mine a kind of a medium-sized garden, but it packs a lot in it. I think I planted total tomato plants. I planted almost 40. I think it was like 37, and so they are all coming in where I live. And the one thing that is about Romas is it's one and done. So once they finish producing over the next several weeks, they'll be done for the season. I tried 2 new varieties that are supposed to be really good for paste, and I'm very pleased with them. One of them is called Super Sauce, and it's a large tomato that's really meaty. And then the other one is called Big Mama, and so it's also a paste tomato, and it's really heavy and dense and thick too. So I probably am going to plant more of those. Now those are indeterminate tomatoes, which means they'll keep producing along with my large red cherry tomatoes. They'll keep producing until the first frost, or until, they just kind of die off after the fall. But by first frost, they'll be done. Here in southeastern North Carolina, this is a large pot full. Here in southeastern North Carolina, my first frost is almost at Thanksgiving. It's like the week before Thanksgiving is our first predicted frost date. All right, so I'm going to turn this on a medium high, and I'm not going to leave it for too long. I want it to start warming up and get going, and let's reduce it and let some of this water get out. Then we're going to can it. I'm going to water bath this one, and I'll show you that process in just a little bit. Well, we've been cooking this now for a little bit. As you can see, it's reduced. And our next step, while this was cooking and I was stirring it occasionally and getting it all ready to go into my jars, I took my water bath canner and I placed my 8 jars in here. I didn't turn it on, but just a little bit, because all I'm trying to do is warm my jars up. You never in canning want to take cold jars, put hot liquid in them at all, and then start canning them, because there's a chance they could crack. There's a chance they could just explode out there and just make a mess. So we don't want that. So I always warm my jars up. Now, I have washed these. They've dried one time, and I washed them in the dishwasher actually. And so now I'm just going to carefully get the water out of them. I'm going to place them over here while they're warm so that they can get ready for me to put some of this sauce in there. Which reminds me, I need to turn our sauce off. I think when you start working on tomatoes, for me, I look at the number of tomatoes I have to process, not even the ones that are still out on the vine. It gets a little overwhelming, to say the least. So this is going to be over the course of the next probably 2 days at least, to get some of this already up, and then we will continue on and pick from the garden and keep going through the rest of the harvest. We got our jars out. I'm gonna flip them over. They're still warm. They're not cold. My canner, my water bath canner, is not a double. It's a single. And so it can only do 8 jars at a time. And so it's a time consumption thing. I've gotten to where I like pressure canning much more, but for tomatoes and products like this, I think it's better if you water bath them. It doesn't cook them to death like a pressure canner does. So let's get started. In my jars, we're going to be adding a couple of things. We're going to add a half a teaspoon of salt to every one of my jars. And this is, for me, not an exact measurement. And then also to our jars, we're going to add a full tablespoon of lemon juice. Now, why am I adding lemon juice to my jars of my tomatoes? Because we want to bring the acidity up to a good level to help preserve it, to make it safer. Tomatoes acid, it varies. And so this just makes it a little more shelf stable. So you don't want to use fresh lemons. That's the only catch. Don't squeeze your own lemon juice to do this process. Again, it has to do with the pH balance in these jars. The other thing is make sure you're using a fresh bottle of lemon juice. I get a little wanting everything to be as close to fresh as I can get. We're going to add a tablespoon to each one of these jars. Okay, I've got my sauce over here. I've got my ladle, and we're going to fill these up to just below this line. That leaves me about an inch headspace, which is one of the requirements to keep things safe for it to vacuum seal. So you don't want to fill your jars over this line on your mason jars. Okay, now that we've got our jars filled, and they're hot, so be careful. And we're going to take, I use white vinegar and I use a paper towel because you want to clean the rims of your jars so that when you put the lids on, there is nothing between the lid, no sauce, no anything between the lid and that seal. So you want to make sure you wipe every single one of them off, get all the residue off. This is also a great time to check for any chips that you might feel as you're running your finger across these rims. Okay. Now, if you don't want to use lemon juice, then you can get citric acid to add to your jars. I just happen to like lemon juice. It doesn't change the flavor. It literally just raises the pH. Now I did rinse these off because they're brand new, fresh out of the box. Now I'm also one of these people that I use a new lid every time I can. I know that there's some people out there that say, "Oh no, reuse those lids 2 or 3 times." I just don't do it. I don't want to take a chance. I put in too much hard work to have something not seal correctly, or to take the chance that it would come, unsealed while it's been in my cabinet and then reseal maybe because of whatever. So I've got my lids on, I've wiped the rims, I've wiped the lids. So we are ready to get the rings on now. Let me grab my rings, and then we're gonna place them back in the canner. Get this out of our way. Let me grab my rings. Okay. Now, when it comes to putting your rings on your jars, now today I'm using wide mouth jars. You can use the regular jars or the wide mouth ones. I just happen to have wide mouth ones today. All right. So when you put these on, you don't want to like bear down. Okay. You do want them to be finger tight. All right. Okay. We've got our jars are ready to go back into my canner. Now, this is hot water we're putting it in, so needless to say, I'm going to be using my canning tongs to lift and place each one of these in there. All right, I've got all 7 of my jars in my canner. I've got my burner turned back up to high. I'm going to place the lid on these jars. Oh, the other thing is I have in my canner, when I place my jars in, the water level is just above the lids. So they are fully submerged into the water. Now I'm going to place my lid on here. We don't start the timing of processing these jars until this canner comes to a rolling boil, which means it is cooking. Okay, so as this heats up, it won't take long. I will not start my timer for my canner until the steam in the water is rolling boiling. Okay, so remember that you can't start it as soon as you put it in here. You have to wait. We're going to process them for 35 minutes once the water starts a rolling boil. And then we'll see it when I get ready to take them out. Now that our timer has gone off and our tomato sauce is fully processed in the jars, carefully, because again, trying to use all safety that we can, we want to open our lid, but we want to open it away from us so that steam doesn't come in our face. Jars are very hot, right? So we are going to get these out. I can already hear them popping. These are wide mouth jars and they are a little bit harder for me to grasp in my canner. There they are. Look at this. Now understand, it is still cooking. Can you see the bubbles? Can you see it still boiling a little bit? We're going to set them over here. Another little tip is never set your hot jars directly on your countertops. Always put a towel down. Again, it's the cold and the hot thing. We don't want our jars to burst because we set it on a cold countertop. Now you want to let your jars sit with the rings on at this point for at least 24 hours. I always let mine just sit overnight. The next morning I get to take the rings off and make sure all the lids have sealed and everything, because not all lids, you don't hear this wonderful pop as soon as they come out, and sometimes you don't hear it for a couple hours and then all of a sudden you'll start hearing pops where the lid is vacuum sealing. Because remember, the liquid that's in your jar is still processing. These are still like boiling hot. And so as it cools, it's going to create that vacuum and you're going to hear these little pops all over everywhere. Now, some of them do seal in the canner, but the majority of mine is as they sit on this counter and they cool down, they start popping. And that is, for a person that cans, that is one of the best sounds you can hear when you put this much work into everything. Thank you for joining me as we process some tomato sauce. We're going to continue on with making our tomato powders, and then we're going to make some beautiful, yummy tasting marinara sauce to put up tomatoes 3 different ways. So I'll see you in just a little bit.